Director Brennan and the CIA today are continuing to willfully provide inaccurate information and misrepresent the efficacy of torture. In other words, the CIA is lying.
I don't know where he was on 9/11, but he wasn't in the bunker.
A taste of the angry debate this week from Dick Cheney and Democratic Senator Mark Udall in the wake of that Senate report on CIA interrogation methods. And it's time now for our Sunday group, syndicated columnist George Will, Julie Pace, who covers the White House for the Associated Press, Michael Needham, head of Heritage Action for America, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. Well, we asked you for questions for the panel, and we got this on Facebook from Gregory Fournier, who writes, what is the significant accomplishment in releasing a report on a program that ended a long time ago? It's like taking a scab off a cut to make it bleed some more. George, how do you answer Gregory, and is the release of this report good or bad for the country?
On balance, I think good. Remember the movie Few Good Men? Colonel Nathan Jessup, played by Jack Nicholson, is being tormented by a Navy interrogator, played by Tom Cruise, over Code Red, a training technique morally dubious and a kind of cousin to torture at some point. And Jessup exclaims, "You have no idea what it takes to defend a nation." Now, that's true. Most of us don't. And there has to be some secrecy involved. But the default position of a free society is more information is better. We're having a very interesting argument today, and it serves the country. The argument at one level is about whether these techniques work. We ought to know that, because we're not, this is not the last time we will be wounded as a nation. But there's another aspect of this. If the security services of a republic begin to lie to the executive branch of which it's a part, and to the congressional branch which provides its oversight, then you have not just a problem, you have a crisis of the regime, and we want to know if that happened. And I think this interviews this morning advanced that. Because it's, to say no more, it's certainly not clear that the senators are right, that they were completely kept in the dark.
Julie, President Obama had to walk kind of a tightrope this week because on the one hand, he continued to condemn these enhanced interrogation as torture. He's the one who ended them in 2009. On the other hand, he certainly didn't want to undercut the CIA and his director, the man leading the agency, John Brennan.
Absolutely. It put the White House in a bit of a tough position because John Brennan is someone who's been a close advisor to the president. Before he was head of the CIA, he was inside the West Wing. He was the counterterrorism advisor in the building. What you saw Obama trying to do this week was basically have it both ways. He wanted to support the release of the report, say that it was good for the country to have it out, but basically have the release be the end of the discussion. He didn't want to dive into a lot of the conclusions and take a position on them, again, in large part because he wanted to support John Brennan.
Michael, what troubles you the most about the Senate report?
Well, I think it's that it was done in such a partisan fashion. I mean, the conversation that George alludes to is an important conversation for us to have. This report was the result of a very small number of senators, a very small number of staffers who had an axe that they wanted to grind and put out some perspective. As you said in the interviews, they didn't even talk to any of the CIA directors who were involved at the time. Look, if our intelligence agencies did everything right, made every right decision, connected every dot, yesterday would have looked exactly like yesterday, today would look exactly like today. If they do everything exactly wrong, yesterday would have looked exactly like yesterday, today would have looked exactly like today, all the way up until the point that we have in 9/11. And so while these conversations are important, they should be done in a nonpartisan way. They shouldn't be done with an axe to grind. And I think that most Americans, actually, when they look at this, are just, frankly, very grateful that the CIA are the first people in and the last people out of the incredibly dangerous places that we send them. And that's the overall message that we should be getting out there.
But you do think that having a discussion about the techniques, was it torture, did it work, you think that's useful?
Sure, and we've had those conversations. Both the Bush and the Obama Departments of Justice did investigations. They declined to prosecute anybody. We've had lots of these conversations. This particular report, which was done without interviewing any of the people that should have been interviewed for this type of conversation to go forward, was a partisan exercise that a very small number of Democrat senators, a very small number of Democrat staffers wanted to put out, and puts it out and sets up the framework for that debate in a very warped way.
Juan?
Well, look, most Republicans on the committee voted to release the report, so I don't think it's any small group. And this is speaking...
But they didn't actually write the report. It was purely by the Democrats.
No, but I'm saying I think it was 11-3 vote. But the larger point is here. We're talking about what Senator Feinstein called a stain on our national values and our history. We are talking about some big things here, and it's time, I think, that people stop using euphemisms, this enhanced interrogation. We're talking about torture. We're talking about putting people in coffins with insects. We're talking about some of those awful things that you were discussing with the senator and Karl Rove. This is not good. There's no way that we should be sitting out here, oh, well, this was partisan. Look, the facts are it's based on 6 million pages of CIA documents. These are CIA documents. These are live feeds, as you heard, that are being reviewed as to what took place. And then we're talking about the idea that you have people destroying tapes, trying to hack into the Senate Intelligence Committee's files so as to prevent this from being fully aired. That's a threat to our democracy. It's a threat to who we are as Americans.
Do you see the CIA, George, as presenting a threat to the country, to the democracy?
I don't. I do think inherently a security apparatus that must have secrecy and must do things that are on the borderline of the unacceptable or the illegal, and authorized is not a synonym for legal, has to be watched carefully. But in the range of things, the problems of the CIA, it seems to me getting things wrong, from the North Korea's invasion of South Korea to the non-existent weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, are much more serious problems. Let me say one more thing. I hope the argument we're having about torture is going to seep over into domestic life, because there is a widespread practice in American prisons nowadays of prolonged solitary confinement, which has deranging effects on people and is, I think, indistinguishable from torture.
You know,
Let me just ask this, because we've got only about a minute left. And I think here's the big question. If another 9/11 happens, if we're faced with another imminent threat, do we go back to these enhanced interrogation when there's the ticking time bomb and you're worried about a follow-on attack by whoever the KSM is of that era? Or will we be more restrained and, some would argue, Julie, more timid?
And one of the things that the White House is actually hoping by putting this report out is that it becomes something of a firewall if you were to have something like 9/11 happen again, that we have this public accounting, people know what happened, perhaps know what information did or did not come out of these techniques, and that the decision would be that we don't have to do that again. That being said, I just don't think any of us can realistically say that this would never happen again if something as horrific as 9/11 happened. We all saw that in the aftermath of that attack, the nation reacted in ways that I think that a lot of us wouldn't have expected, and people were comfortable with that for a long time.
Michael, I don't know that it's at all clear. As we've seen, yes, the committee issued the report, but it hasn't settled the issue as to, one, whether these tactics were necessary or not, and two, whether they were effective.
Well, I think one of the things that people said after 9/11 was, we will never forget. I think anything that we want to do after the next 9/11, we should make sure that we're having that conversation now, and we're doing them right now. I think that one of the last questions that you asked Jose Rodriguez was important. What is the culture that this creates? After 9/11, people said the CIA was too slow in connecting the dots. They should have been more creative. Well, the culture that second-guessing caused, that correct second-guessing, was one that caused a whole lot of creativity in connecting dots after in the lead up to the war in Iraq. And so this is setting a culture for our intelligence agencies. I think that we need to be doing the things that we need to be doing now, not waiting for the next 9/11.
Let me just quickly say, I think the Church Committee, going back to the 1970s, when they had their report on the CIA, that was very informative and helped us to understand going forward how to control and do what you were talking about, Chris, properly monitor the activities of a needed CIA. But without that monitoring, George, it is a threat to our democracy.
All right.